I'm Polly Middlehurst, and these are your latest GB News headlines. Sir Keir Starmer says the reputation of the country and its democracy is being trashed by the Prime Minister. That comes after the government tried to prevent the former Cabinet Minister Owen Paterson's suspension for breaching lobbying rules. Parliament is due to hold an emergency debate on standards tomorrow. The Sun's associate editor Trevor Kavanagh told GB News the Prime Minister will survive this criticism.
I think that Boris will go through a very rough time tomorrow in Parliament and will get a kicking, and he will take it probably with his usual rueful smile. And to be honest, I think that no matter how big this seems at the moment, this will pale into the distance as other events unfold in the coming weeks and months. And I don't think actually that this particular event will have any impact on the next election.
Over 10 million people have now had their COVID-19 booster jabs in the UK. The Health Secretary, Sajid Javid, is urging the elderly and vulnerable to get theirs too to help avoid restrictions over Christmas. More than 50 million first-dose vaccines have been delivered in the UK. And the US is reopening its borders to UK visitors who are fully vaccinated against COVID from tomorrow. The country's been closed since early 2020 due to the pandemic. Travellers from Ireland and the 26 Schengen nations in Europe, as well as China, India, South Africa, are among those also allowed in from tomorrow. Travel and aviation expert Sally Gethin has told GB News this is a huge boost for the UK travel sector.
The fact that the USA is opening up really is a step towards the world unlocking. I mean, obviously, it affects many citizens from other countries who are fully vaccinated, who can also enter the USA. But the UK accounts for the most arrivals into the United States every year. Before the pandemic, it was 4.8 million. We are their top market.
Investigations are underway after at least 8 people were killed and dozens more injured at a Travis Scott festival in Texas. And a warning, there are some flashing images in the next few pictures. The rapper says he's absolutely devastated following the stampede at his Astro World Music Festival in Houston on Friday. He was on stage when the crowd surged forward, which police are calling a mass casualty incident. And within the last few moments, victims have been named as police push forward with that investigation.
My fans really mean the world to me, and I always just really want to leave them with a positive experience. And anytime I can make out, anything that's going on, I stop the show and, help them get the help they need, I could just never imagine the severity of the situation.
Well, just to bring you some more information on that, family and friends have been paying tribute to those who died following that crowd search at the Travis Scott concerts in Houston in Texas. And Scott has released a statement saying he's working to help the families of the ones that were lost after the crowd pressed forward whilst he was on stage. In other news, Aston Villa have sacked their manager, Dean Smith, after 3 years at the helm. His side suffered a 5th successive Premier League defeat on Friday, losing 1-0 to Southampton at St Mary's. He did, however, guide the club back into the top flight in his first season in charge. The 50-year-old also led Villa to the League Cup final at Wembley in 2020, narrowly losing 2-1 to Manchester City. You're watching Sky. Don't forget, of course, we're available on Virgin and Freeview and Freesat and the Apple TV app. I'll be back with the latest news in an hour.
Good morning. You're watching GB News. This is The Political Correction, and I'm Nigel Farage. Joining me in the studio today is Paul Embury, and joining us at home from Northern Ireland is Arlene Foster. We're here for the next hour to correct politics and put you back in charge. It isn't just journalists talking to journalists. We want to know what you think right throughout all of this. Yet another Tory sleaze row. It's almost sort of slightly déjà vu-y, really, all of this, isn't it? This time, the Sunday Times lead with a big story suggesting that if you give the Conservative Party a total of £3 million, act as a treasurer for the party, you will go to the House of Lords. And they give a list of half a dozen people who've been pretty much through that route. COP26 enters its second week. The climate summit in Glasgow has seen world leaders and Hollywood actors jetting in, yes, 400 private jets. Is it all actually going to be worth it? Plus, a record 853 people crossed the English Channel in a single day this week. Well, how many more will come before any action at all is taken? And we're going to talk about that in a few moments' time. Please give us your thoughts, give us your views, gbviews@gbnews.uk, or of course you can tweet using the hashtag @GBNews. This is The Political Correction. So the Sunday Times leads with this story today. It's their big front page splash, and it's something that just doesn't go away. New Tory sleaze row as donors who pay $3 million get a seat in the House of Lords. Now, in the last hour, we had Martin Bell, the man with the white suit, and he came on and joined us. And I did love his throwaway comment. He said, I thought seats in the House of Lords were a lot cheaper than £3 million. Let's see what Martin Bell said to us this time an hour ago.
It's all right so long as no money changes hands. As soon as money changes hands, then that's corruption.
Yes. I mean, the word corruption, Keir Starmer used the word corruption quite openly this week. And it remains to be seen whether the Labour Party can capitalise on this in the way that Tony Blair did against John Major's government in the run-up to that 1997 general election. More broadly, Martin, have we reached a point, in your view, with the whole system of people being appointed to the House of Lords? Is it time we had major constitutional reform?
Yes, I used to raise this point many times. I thought it took only £1 million to buy a seat in the House of Lords, but you know what inflation is. Now it's $3 million, and I got up in the House one day and said, we might as well have a rate card, so much for an MB, so much for an OB, so much for a knighthood. There is a system. It has all the effectiveness of a chocolate fire guard. I think we have to revisit this and put something in place for the first time that really checks this peculiarly British form of corruption.
Yeah, and finally, Martin, it's been rumoured that you might be dusting off that white suit and having a crack at the by-election in North Shropshire. Is there any truth in this?
Nigel, I'm 83 years old and on a stick, and I think that the fact that he resigned his seat makes it much less compelling. But in extreme circumstances demand extreme remedies. I think you should take a look at Leicester East. If Keith Vaz seeks to return to the House of Commons, then it might be worth looking at.
There you are. It might be worth looking at, said 83-year-old Martin Bell. And I thought that was rather interesting. Arlene, more thoughts on Tory sleaze. Is that phrase, is it just here for this weekend, or is it back? Is it going to stick?
No, I think it will stick certainly for a while, and I think that the Prime Minister should be concerned about it. It doesn't help when people who were involved back in 1992, 93, and talking, of course, about Sir John Major, comes in and says that Boris's government is, I think he used the word politically corrupt. I mean, that is quite credible coming from Sir John Major, who is from the same political party as the Prime Minister. So I think this one will run for some time. But as I said earlier in the programme, Nigel, it is wrong that we just talk about the Tories in this context, because, of course, we have a Labour MP convicted of a campaign of harassment against a love rival. She's given a suspended sentence, and she's still a Member of Parliament. So I think we do need to talk about that as well, and not just about the Conservative Party.
Yeah, and Paul Embry, obviously you're going to say what you're going to say about this Conservative government, but of course it's not that long ago, is it, that we had a cash for honour scandal when Tony Blair was Prime Minister?
No, and, you know, I don't think these things are necessarily party political. You look back, most governments in history have had their episodes of sleaze. Labour, maybe not as much as Tories, but Labour have certainly...
of course not.
Labour have certainly had theirs in the past. I think the thing here is the Tories were absolutely hammered for this stuff in the 1990s. You know, we had the Cash for Questions, Neil Hamilton, the Al Fayed scandal, etc. I think the difference there is Labour at the time was a serious functioning opposition and was able to hold the government to account, was able to put the government under pressure. People saw the Labour Party in the 1990s as a serious alternative for government. The difficulty now, frankly, is that Labour is not presenting itself as a serious alternative to government. It is not holding this government to account in the way that it ought to be doing as an opposition. So there's a whole sense about the whole thing. Look, the government's getting away with this stuff. The government's getting away with murder. And I think the danger then is you end up in a situation where people just start abstaining in elections because they think the governing party is just filled with sleaze. We haven't got a serious opposition party. They're all as bad as each other. What's the point? And that's a real danger for our democracy.
Paul, I am convinced if there was a general election next Thursday, the turnout would be millions lower than it was in 2019. And I think that's sort of where we are. Now, in a moment, we'll talk about migrant crossings, a subject that raises the temperature of debate. But before we do that, Paul, a story that's caught your eye this week.
Yeah, this is a story from the Prospect Trade Union, which is very much the trade union for professional and technical workers, really. And they commissioned some polling, which I think gave some really interesting findings, particularly in light of the pandemic and what's happening in the workplace as we come out of it. And the polling found that 1 in 3 workers are now monitored by a camera in the workplace, which is up from 1 in 4 6 months ago.
Yeah.
And probably more interestingly, 13% of home workers, so people working remotely for their company, are also being monitored by
through the laptop,
cameras, through the laptops, through a webcam or some facility like that, which is up from 5% 6 months ago. So has nearly trebled. Now, Prospect, I think quite reasonably, is calling for a ban on webcams monitoring people at home. And I think the argument here is that homes are often people's sanctuaries from work. Now, we know, as a result of the situation that we've been in for the last 18 months, many people have effectively had to turn their homes into workplaces. And I think most people have gone along with that and said, needs must. It's not unreasonable that my employer is asking me to do that. But if the employer then says, OK, you're now going to be working from home more often, and by the way, we're going to train a webcam into your study or your dining room, wherever it is you're doing your work. And there's stories that Prospects have discovered that in some cases, you have bosses sitting in front of whole screens of workers who are sitting there, and he or she is able to see them and what they're up to on their webcam. So I think this has all implications, serious implications, first of all, for personal liberty and the fact that people are sitting in their own private abode. But secondly, for the fact that many people want their home to be, as I say, a haven from their workplace.
I've got a solution. Go back to the office.
Well, I mean, I suspect, to be blunt, that a lot of workers who currently are being told that they have to work remotely wouldn't actually mind going back to the office. I think there's probably some who are happy to stay at home. But look, either way, whether it's the choice of the worker himself or herself or the employer who's saying, you have to work from home, I think all of us should be uncomfortable about the idea that an employer can train cameras into your private home to make sure you're sitting there and you're doing your work. That has all sorts of implications. The law doesn't really cover it, I don't think, arguably because we've never really been confronted with this number of remote workers before. But now we know that people are working remotely in these numbers. I think there's no choice really but politicians and perhaps the Information Commission is to say, look, we need to upgrade the law to make sure that employers can't exploit people here.
I think we're the most surveilled country, certainly in the Western world, and driving up these smart motorways now, well, it isn't just about the hard shoulder going, but digital motorways. The big sign I saw on the M4 the other day, proudly telling us that we will be monitored and filmed every moment we're on the road. So wherever we go, we're being monitored. But if you're employing people with your own money, and during lockdown they were forced to work from home, you can kind of understand why they want to make sure that people were actually working in that particular circumstance.
I mean, it's certainly not unreasonable, I don't think, for an employer to want to have that assurance that their employees are working. I mean, that's reasonable, I think, for an employer in any circumstances. Yeah. But there has to be a limit to these things. Otherwise, where does it end? I mean, it's one thing, I think, saying, look, we have to have cameras in the workplace for security reasons and whatever. As long as the staff are fully consulted on that, they're through their trade union, ideally, are able to raise their concerns. But look, homes are people's personal private property, and if for reasons beyond their own control they're told you now have to work from home, that doesn't, in my view, automatically give the employer the right to say, oh, and by the way, we're going to train a camera into your home. For me, a home is off limits. It's one thing taking a call there. Yeah. It's one thing having a meeting by Zoom there. It's another thing someone pointing a camera at you.
Well, one person who is at home this morning is Arlene. We're filming you at home this morning, Arlene.
With her consent.
Yes. Yes, with her consent.
I've invited you in by consent to be with me in my own home. But I mean, I do agree with Paul. I think homes are safe places, and having cameras trained on people's homes. I have this vision, Paul, of somebody sitting behind a desk with a bank of computers in front of them, with everybody's home on the computer. I mean, it is really quite wrong to think in that way. However, if people are working from home, employers do need to know that they are actually working. And so there are other ways to do that, of course. By monitoring, are they logged onto their computer? Are they sending email? You know, there are ways to do that without actually having a camera trained on a person's home without their consent. As I say, I invite you in most Sunday mornings to my home, but I do take the point that it is wrong to have a camera trained on people's homes, certainly without their consent. And there are other ways to monitor that people are working. Of course, the best thing to do is to go back to work if you possibly can. And I know that most people do want to get back to work because their homes is a place where they come home, they rest, they enjoy family time, as opposed to having to work there all the time. And I think for most people, they like to go out to work and then come home to have a place of sanctuary.
Well, at the heart of all of this is the big debate over productivity. People saying, oh, I'm so much more productive at home. I don't believe a word of it because, you know, the pet's ill or the kids are late home from school or, you know, there's a knock at the door, it's Amazon with a parcel. I don't believe a word of it. We will come back to this issue, I have no doubt. But coming up, we look at the record numbers of crossings by migrants this week. 853 people made that journey on Thursday. 454 people made that journey on Wednesday. How many more need to cross before something happens? Oh, and interestingly, did you know the French have just drawn down the first chunk of Priti Patel's 54 million? Yes, it's true. Back in a moment.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday. Call to the point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the Channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, right here on GB News, for To the Point.
Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8pm weekdays on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7pm for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show, Farage, 7pm till 8pm, Monday through Thursday. And there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink we have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else, I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
The Home Office confirmed that the UK authorities had rescued or intercepted 853 people from 25 incidents earlier on this week. That makes a new daily record. Now, look, if you want to find out what's going on in the English Channel, there's only one station to watch, and it's GB News. We were talking about this on the first big day this week when 454 came. And the next day, I held up in the evening all the daily newspapers, barely any mention at all. And then the next day, I had live in the studio with me Mark White, GB News' home and security editor. And Mark, we predicted 800 that day. We were pretty much bang on, weren't we?
Yeah, it took a couple of days though for the Home Office to release those figures. I was actually on Arlene's show on Friday just after the figures were released, and we broke that on air, talking about the fact it wasn't just the more than 850, Nigel, that crossed the channel on Wednesday of this week, Tuesday night into Wednesday, but it was on the very same day 779 who got into difficulties on the French side of the channel and had to be rescued in a massive air and sea rescue operation that took place on the French side of the channel. We know that some migrants lost their lives there. It was a very significant day and some real questions, I think, for French authorities, because the truth of it is, although we question so often the Home Office and their tactics, once these boats are in the water and they're heading towards the UK, well, once they get into UK waters, we can do nothing but comply with the law of the sea and pick them up and take them to the UK. This turn-back tactic that they're talking about, Nigel, is only going to work in a very, very small number of cases. So they're getting off the beaches in the first place. That is where they need to be stopped. And when you think of that single day of the 850 odd in UK waters, 779 being rescued in French waters, that's more than 1,600 people who've left French beaches all around Calais, Dunkirk and that area. That you can't do that in a sort of clandestine way. That is, you know, something that surely the authorities patrolling those beaches would pick up on fairly quickly.
Yeah, and we're giving money, and as I said before the break, the first tranche of the latest £54 million has been drawn down upon. Mark, I've been calling this for a very long time, as you know. You know, right from the beginning of the pandemic, and I said back in the spring of this year that it would be 20,000 this year, but it could even be 30,000, and that's where we're headed. I think next year there's a real possibility this could turn into something rather like the Mediterranean. And I don't know whether you picked up the comment, but a French official for the Pas-de-Calais region involved with transport said on Friday morning an incalculable number of migrants are now reaching the Calais-Dunkirk area. What is the government going to do, Mark, or is this just going to deteriorate further?
Well, in terms of the French government, there is some real concern and some real friction, Nigel, that you picked up on there between the local officials in that area of northwest France and the government in Paris, because what's happening at the moment, very much against what local officials want, is that they're now building shelters because they've had this, to quote the local official, as you say, incalculable number of migrants who've come across, and they're building shelters in Calais itself to stop them sleeping on the streets, underpasses in the what was the jungle in those kind of wooded areas around Calais itself. The same is happening in Dunkirk and elsewhere along that coastline. And that, as I say, is something that the local officials are not at all happy about. They feel that that's going to act as more of a draw, but it's difficult to see how it can be more of a draw. There are thousands who are arriving there now with a view to getting over because they know it's a tactic that works. The people traffickers don't even need to tell them. They just need to look at the news and they can see the daily arrivals in Dover.
Yep, not one single deportation thus far this year. And the pull factors are still there, aren't they? The pull factors of accommodation, of dental care, of health care, of 3 square meals a day and £38 a week spending money. Mark, politically, I suppose it sort of suits Boris Johnson to leave Priti Patel as Home Secretary, and she takes the blame for all of it at some point.
Well, certainly, yes. While she's in office there, she is effectively the official who is going to take the brunt of the criticism. But remember as well, this tactic that she wants to introduce is a tactic that could prove very controversial. They're only going to use it in a very small number of cases, we understand this, pushback tactics where they're going to get officers on jet skis, and I know you got hold of footage not that long ago, Nigel, that showed them actually practicing for this tactic. Well, very soon, maybe not in these winter months, but they are going to use that in earnest. And the real concern is, and it will be difficult for Priti Patel if something happens in the way of a tragedy, but it will be very difficult for the individual commanding officer, the skipper at sea, who has to make that tactical decision. That rests with them, not really Priti Patel at the end of the day. And they will... you know, you can imagine they are going to be very reluctant to use this for fear that these boats, which are flimsy at the best of times, absolutely packed out, are going to run into difficulties, capsize, or God forbid the migrants on board threaten to jump in the water and do that anyway, and it becomes a very significant tragedy. It seems unsolvable, it really does, at the moment, unless you actually make some inroads into the people trafficking operation.
Mark White, thank you very much indeed. All I would add there is Australia managed to stop it, and they literally took the boats and towed them back to Indonesia to international condemnation, but the boats stopped coming. Now, I've looked at the shipping forecast, Paul, for this week, and we've got 3 or 4 very calm days coming. So I expect another couple of thousand come this week, and we're filling up hotels all over the country. We're filling up private accommodation. I think the public are quite angry about this.
I think they are, and not unreasonably. I think there is a difference. I've always argued there's a difference between genuine refugees and economic migrants. It strikes me that the vast majority of people coming from France fall into the latter category. Doesn't mean we shouldn't treat them as human beings, of course, but there's clearly a distinction between people who are fleeing a war-torn country and are in desperate need of immediate help, and people who have made a conscious decision to come from, in this case, a country such as France, which is arguably one of the most civilised countries on the planet. So I think the public do spot that and are very uneasy about it. I think they think the whole processing system has to be much more efficient. You know, people often languish here and they're not put through the system properly, and the number of people who have been sent back because their claims were determined not to be proper and just. It just doesn't seem to be happening. Clearly, we need to disincentivise people from making the journey in the first place, because, not least because it's a danger to them, actually, if they're coming across in the numbers that they are. Whether you do that through some sort of offshoring processing system, turning the boats back, I think we should only do that as a last resort, and if we're absolutely confident it's not going to result in loss of life or injury. But what is very clear, I think, is that the current situation is completely unsustainable, and there's a disconnect between what the politicians are saying or not saying and what the public are saying.
Arlene, it's completely out of control. I think on the current course, with all the pull factors still in place, with zero deportations, with the French, well, taking not much more than a casual interest in stopping these boats, it seems to me. Perhaps that's unfair. Maybe next year's 50,000 or 60,000. What do we do?
Well, I remember thinking when you made the assessment of how many people you thought were going to be coming across, I thought, surely not. And actually, it looks like it's going to be more. And that is really very concerning and very worrying. I think we should be looking at how others deal with this issue. And you rightly mentioned the Australians. We should be engaging with them. They are a Commonwealth country. They are one of our allies. We should be engaging with them to find out how we can work with them, because, of course, Indonesia is further away from Australia than France is from the south coast of England. So what is it we can be doing to deal with this matter? And I do think we really need to deal with the criminal gangs. When Mark was on with me on Friday, we spent some time talking about how much money was being made by these criminal gangs and how we could deal with that. I do think that there needs to be a tougher approach taken, because these people are just profiteering of others' misery. They're getting £5,000, £10,000 for each of these unfortunate people. Probably their life savings, whatever way they get that money, they're left them with nothing, and they are so vulnerable, and they're left vulnerable to these criminal gangs. And therefore, we do need to see a much tougher approach to the gangs that are assisting these people to come across in tiny little boats at great risk to their own lives, and I think it needs to be tackled.
Well, there are prosecutions of those involved with these gangs, but the problem is, on a very calm week, there are millions of euros at stake, and you can imprison them for as long as you like, but sadly, more will take their place. COP26, it's not quite the story it was at the beginning of this week, but it's still pretty important. 100,000 people marched in Glasgow yesterday to demand more action from governments, more action from COP, much along the same lines as Greta Thunberg the other day, who has now sunk into foul-mouthed abuse, which is rather sad. Our political correspondent, Tom Harwood, is in Glasgow and has sent us this report.
Well, what a week it has been at COP26. More than 90% of countries by GDP signing up to net zero by the middle of this century. Countries representing 88% of the world's forests signing up to reverse deforestation by the end of this decade. Indeed, pledges on methane, reducing that by 30% across a whole host of countries by the end of this decade as well. Not only deforestation, but ocean conservation. 30% of the world's oceans committed to conservation now. Much has been achieved at this COP, yet for some people, that's simply not enough. We're here currently at a big protest in the middle of Glasgow, where people have gathered to protest COP, to say it's blah, 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 to protest the actions and the committals to net zero. I've been speaking to people who say that even if the entire world reached net zero tomorrow, it wouldn't be enough, because they don't want just net zero, they want 0, 0, 0. I've spoken to people here who want no growth, who want to end the capitalist system. I've spoken to some people here who want Cuba to have their embargo lifted by the US, others who want to deliver a socialist world economy, and some others who want an independent Scotland. It seems like quite a few causes have been muddled up and mixed in to this protest, but then that's the nature of these things. The curiosity here, the curious thing, is that there are ecological and environmental protesters protesting the conference of their dreams. It's unimaginable 10 years ago that you'd have all of these countries committing to eliminating carbon from their economies on a net basis. It's unimaginable that we would have heard these pledges and all this cash going to developing countries to get ready for a net zero transition. It's unimaginable that the leaders of the biggest businesses in the world would be getting on board with that net zero agenda too. All of that's been happening down the road, and yet the people here at this protest are not happy. It makes you wonder, will they ever be happy? It makes you wonder, at what point will enough be enough? It's a curious point, but you know what? There's one more week of COP to go. Will there be a big agreement by Friday? Will there be a new seismic Paris-style agreement of all of the nations at COP, the 196 UN member states, those countries of the world? Will there be one new big agreement in terms of changing the way that we live, regulating more businesses, potentially fining businesses that do not meet net zero commitments? There's a hell of a lot going on. You'd think it would be the dream of the people here protesting, but something tells me that the people here today just love protesting too much.
Well, that was a great report there from Tom Harwood. It really was. I have to say, I sort of followed the week very closely. Lots and lots of virtue signalling and a lot of nonsense talked. Alok Sharma, who is the president of this COP26, who is not exactly the most inspiring political figure, standing up on stage and saying, I feel that the end of coal is close. Well, I tell you what, Mr. Sharma, this year the Chinese will burn 4 billion tonnes of it and the Indians 1 billion tonnes of it. Frankly, so much of what has been said means nothing without the cooperation of those big countries. Arlene, do you wish you'd been there at COP26 all week?
Well, Nigel, I thought you were going to go to a cave this week and avoid all television. So I'm quite surprised to hear that you've been listening very closely to COP26. But look, I mean, I think there has been some successes during the week. I mean, I do actually believe in the deforestation pledge. I think that's a good thing that we're going to stop that across. I think it's 130 countries have signed up to that, and to actually try and reverse. Because I'm a great believer in planting more trees and having trees as carbon, a natural carbon capture across the piece. So, I mean, I'm in favour of that, but I do think some of the hyperbole that has come from COP26 has been really quite incredible, and everybody's trying to outdo each other on how green they are, and I'm greener than you. And I think Tom's report there just showed that there are so many people there for other reasons as opposed to saving the planet. I saw Palestinian flags. We've heard that there is SNP people there wanting an independent Scotland. So it looks as if it's a composite protest as opposed to a protest in relation to the environment.
Yeah, and Arlene, I'm absolutely with you. I'm tired of hearing all the negatives. What about some positives? Yeah, what about not just protecting forests from being cut down, but planting new ones as well. A lot of things we could talk about in terms of do that properly and get a big biodiversity uptick as well. So yes, I want to hear some more positive things. But what hypocrisy? What hypocrisy? The Prime Minister stands up and says, we're going to stop deforestation. Well, the biggest power plant in this country is the Drax power plant in northern Yorkshire, and there we burn trees. Yes, that's right. Trees that come from the Baltic states and come from North America. We burn trees, and we actually use taxpayers' subsidy by putting extra expense on their bills. We subsidise all of this, and it's now the biggest single CO2 emitter in this country. This biofuels nonsense has to end, and if the Prime Minister has stood up and said that, I'd have a bit more respect for all of this. Sorry, Paul, I was on my hobby horse there, but it drives me bonkers.
Yeah, no, I noticed. I completely agree with Arlene around the hyperbole of the debate. There has been hysteria, there's been hyperbole, and my problem with it is actually, yes, climate change is a serious issue, unquestionably. Yes, we need an international approach to dealing with it. Of course we do. But these doomsday scenarios that some of the politicians and the media and various activists are constantly trotting out, I think just undermines their case in many respects. So I think we need a more temperate debate and a more proportionate debate. We shouldn't just constantly go for the worst case scenarios when having this debate, which is what too many people do. And actually we need a plan. And this is the big problem. It's one thing saying we need to transition to a new green economy, fine. But when you have across the world millions of people working in industries that will fall by the wayside during that transition, and you have no plan in place for making sure that those people stay in work and their communities are not decimated. When you don't have a plan for, if people have got to get rid of their boilers, get heat pumps, buy electric cars, how are they going to afford that? Then really it just becomes posturing. And I fear there's an awful lot of posturing going on in this debate, and it's really not helpful. Well, in response, if Mr. Sharma was here, he would tell you
that this week in Glasgow, countries have backed a tech plan to reach net zero. There has been a deforestation pledge with 100 countries signing up. He would tell you that India has signed up for a net zero target in 2070. And the finance industry will be forced to show their net zero plans. These, apparently, are the great gains this week. In a moment, we'll cross briefly to the US and look at what's happening. The Democrats, it looks like, have got the same problems the British Labour Party had in the 2019 general election.
Join me, Alex Phillips, for the afternoon agenda on GB News, Monday to Thursday from 4 p.m. till 6 p.m. We don't lecture to you or try to tell you what to think. We do a deep delve into a topic with views from across the range of debate, therefore leaving you, the viewer, to make up your own mind. Join me, Alex Phillips, for the afternoon agenda on GB News, 4 till 6, Monday to Thursday.
Join me, Mark White, here on GB News. For more than 2 decades, I've been at the sharp end of reporting crime and security at home and abroad. From the scourge of terrorism to the fight against violent crime and the deepening small boats crisis in the Channel. They are issues you rightly care about, and so do I. As GB News Home and Security Editor, my focus will be on the stories that matter to you.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
You're watching GB News live across the UK and the world on our digital stream.
GB News is Britain's news channel.
We are the UK's home of discussion and debate from all perspectives.
We are here for you. Don't forget to join our YouTube community by clicking on that subscribe button.
And if you want the GB News app, you can click and catch up on programmes anytime.
We love to hear from you, so email us.
gbviews@gbnews.uk.
Thanks for being part of the GB News family.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7 p.m. for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of 2 wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.
Join my show Farage, 7 p.m. till 8 p.m. Monday through Thursday, and there you will get opinion, analysis, debate, and I'll cover stories that nobody else dares to touch. And then for the last 15 minutes, talking pints. We're over a drink. We have a civilised conversation with someone. We very often disagree, but we do it in a grown-up way. Come and join me on Farage.
I'm Colin Brazier. I've reported from more than 70 countries around the world, covered wars from Afghanistan to Iraq, from Lebanon to the Balkans. I'm trying to bring that experience, that feel for events, to the studio. And something else. I'm ready to give an opinion. Today's stories with a spark. Brazier from 8 p.m. weekdays on GB News.
Well, Lots of subjects this week under discussion, some of it quite passionate, and your views flooding in. Brian says, when it comes to climate change, surely the elephant in the room is the huge rise in the world's population. Yes, Brian, in my lifetime, the sheer rise in population is frightening. Brian, rising population is the biggest single factor, no question.
Stuart tells us, please stop using the word sleaze. This is not sleaze, it is corruption. And yes, I voted for Boris, never again.
Brian thinks corruption is rife in this country and has been for many years, and MPs are not interested. I worked in education for 42 years and numerous jobs were filled due to who people knew, often on inflated salaries. Nepotism is costing the nation dear. I suspect Brian has nothing very much new in that, sadly. Arlene, do you have some messages over there?
Yeah, I have. So Jeff, just on the subject you've been talking about, has resigned to what's been going on. He says sleaze and corruption will always be a part of politics and the human condition. And then Will has said, when political parties have been in power for too long, they think that they can get away with anything. Just look north of the border to Scotland and see what the SNP are doing. So some views there in relation to the subject we were talking about earlier on.
Yeah, and lots of feedback on the cross-channel stuff. Brenda saying, you ask how many more migrants will be let into the UK before action is taken. In my belief, Johnson and Patel have no intention whatsoever of taking any meaningful action.
And Richard is feeling rather cynical. He tells us, withdrawing from the protocol, just more bluster from Brian O'Boris and his Tory in name-only pals. They'll never trigger Article 16 as they want the problems to continue so they can use it to take us back into full EU membership, just like all the bluster on the illegal immigrants.
Now, look, Richard, you know, there's nobody more cynical about the political class than me when it comes to Europe, but no one's taking us back in. It ain't going to happen. John says Major's lacked credibility ever since he signed Maastricht. Robert mocks Priti Patel. Water taxes are doing very, very well after only trading for 2 years. Right, lots. I mean, we could spend the whole day just reading out your messages, and thank you for them. Now, Tuesday in America was perhaps a little bit bigger in terms of those election results than you realise. Republican Glenn Youngkin defeated Democrat Terry McAuliffe in a tight race for the governor's seat of Virginia. Interesting. Youngkin getting over 50% of the vote. That was 12 points up from where he'd been last time. In New Jersey, there was another governor's race where Philip Murphy, the sitting Democrat governor, just about hung on. And interestingly, right across the country, there were elections for school boards. Gosh, I wish we had that in this country. And we've seen some big, big changes taking place there. One of the issues that really hit the fore in Virginia was education. Parents, not parents who'd voted for the Republicans, not parents who were fans of Donald Trump particularly, parents living in the northern part of Virginia, a very wealthy part of the state, indeed a very wealthy part of America, but they don't want their kids being taught critical race theory. They don't want their kids being brought up to hate America and everything it's ever stood for, or indeed stands for today. And I thought I'd sort of get Paul in on this. It's quite interesting, Paul. You know, we hear about AOC and those very much on the left. Indeed, there are congressmen and women in the Democrats who want to defund the police. There was a referendum actually in Minneapolis on defunding the police. It was defeated. And it seems to me the Democrats have made the same mistake the British Labour Party made, that the hard left gets in and you find that half of your natural vote feels alienated by what you're doing.
I think actually over the last few years there's been some striking parallels between what the Democrats have been doing and what the British Labour Party have been doing. The Democrats, like the British Labour Party, over recent years have become much more kind of middle class and metropolitan in their outlook, more globalist, very much more liberal. And in doing so, in taking that trajectory, undoubtedly they have lost large parts of working class, blue collar America, large parts of the Rust Belt. And, you know, that if you sort of take that in the context of Britain, that's the Labour Party losing the red wall for arguably very, very similar reasons. Whether or not they'll be able to win them back, I'm not sure. I mean, these elections were seen as something as a referendum on Biden. And I think it's arguable to say that it hasn't turned out particularly well for him. But the danger, I think, for the Labour Party is if they look at what happened with the presidential election and say, look, Biden won, so therefore we've really got nothing to worry about, just carry on this path, one more heave, and we'll be back in next time. I think they're going to get a rude awakening, because I don't sense at all people in that red wall, in those red wall constituencies, flocking back to the Labour Party anytime soon. So there are real parallels between the two situations.
It's fascinating. Yeah, we've got the red wall, and in America it's the Great Lakes. It's kind of Pennsylvania right through the lakes to Wisconsin, and they really are now the key battlegrounds in America. So, Arlene, it looks like Donald Trump could be back in 2024, says he tongue-in-cheek.
Well, I mean, I think people need to understand where Virginia is in terms of geography and politically as well.
Yeah.
Biden, as I understand it, had a double-digit lead in Virginia when he won the presidential election. And yet here is a governor who went out on a particular campaign, you're right, around education and the fact that critical race theory was being talked about, wokeism was being talked about. I had a conversation with Professor Eric Kaufman on Friday around all of this, and he said that this is the start of the kickback in America in relation to what has been going on with the hard left. And I think it is interesting to see if that then translates into something here in the UK around some of the events that we have seen. Kathleen Stock event, of course, down in the university. Are we going to see a reaction here in the UK in the manner that we've seen in America? Because sometimes that does happen. Paul's right to talk about the parallels between Labour and the Democrats and what's been happening. But I think we're going to see more of a conversation about some of those elements that put this gentleman, Youngkin, in as governor will come over to the UK.
Yeah, it's so interesting. So many of the arguments and debates on both sides of the pond are so similar. It is really quite remarkable. Well, I was teasing you a bit there, but I think Donald Trump will win in 2024. I really, really do.
God forbid. God forbid.
No, I think he will. And it'll be a good thing for us because he's pro-British, which Biden clearly isn't. That's my opinion. The last story we're going to discuss and debate and look at today is a story that I never, ever thought I'd be covering or even debating. But it's something I've heard a lot of in the last couple of weeks. Are the royals becoming too vocal? Well, both Prince Charles and his son William spoke at COP26 about changing the way both society and indeed the whole economy operate and work. And there are some of us that fear that they are stepping over the line, not just standing up and doing good charitable work and acting as patrons, but in fact getting involved in politics. Let's have a listen.
After all, if we are to restore the critical balance between people and planet, we need to protect, restore and invest in nature. Investment in natural capital, including fostering more species-rich systems rather than sterile monocultures, can support productive and resilient agriculture, forestry and aquaculture, while avoiding the pitfalls of climate change, land degradation, resource depletion, pollution and insect decline.
Ours is a common mission, to look without fear or despair at the challenges ahead in this crucial decade, and to believe that we humans have the ingenuity to make the seemingly impossible possible. But only if we put our collective minds to it. For many of you, world leaders and governments in this room, that means demonstrating leadership and persuading your electorate how much this matters. For others, business leaders and philanthropists, it means transforming the clean green option into the cheapest, best and most obvious choice. Put together, it means ensuring that the brightest and boldest amongst us, in all sectors of society, are given the support to find the answers to the most important question we face: how to repair the planet.
Now, from Charles, this is no surprise. I sat in the European Parliament in 2007 when he said within 7 years the North Pole would completely disappear. But for William to get himself involved, well, maybe they think there's no opposition. Maybe they think it's a completely settled view and it's a safe thing to do. Well, certainly in my peer group, there's been lots of muttering about this, and it was interesting to see today's Mail on Sunday, Peter Hitchens, who has never, ever, he questions many things, he's never, ever questioned the royal family. But Peter Hitchens saying in today's Mail on Sunday, I have just stopped supporting the monarchy. I simply can't do it anymore. I'm not a Republican or anything silly like that. I'd like a proper monarchy. But the House of Windsor's total mass conversion to Green orthodoxy has destroyed the case for this particular royal family. Now, I know that Peter Hitchens is paid to be controversial and to write a column on a Sunday. But Paul, I've got deep misgivings about the royal family getting involved as deeply as this.
Well, I mean, it's sold, isn't it? And I say this as a Republican myself, although not a terribly enthusiastic one. But it's sold on the basis that these people are above politics. They're above politics. You don't have a presidential figure who's got, political views and has been involved in politics in their previous life. These people kind of are above it. And it strikes me that actually in more recent years, they've become more and more politically active. So if you are a monarchist, and especially if you disagree with some of the views they've been arguing, I think you're right to feel uneasy about it. My view is quite simple. If they want to get involved in politics, if they want to have activist views, relinquish their role, stand for election, and then argue your view in the House of Commons like everybody else has to do.
Arlene, you're a monarchist, as I am. Do you understand my misgivings, and indeed Peter Hitchens's too?
I think Peter Hitchens is a bit over the top, if I'm honest, about all of that. I mean, as you know, the environment has long been something that all of the members of the royal family have felt very strongly about. Prince Philip spent his life advocating around sustainability and the environment. He passed that on to his son, and indeed, obviously, he has passed it on to his son. So it's something that they feel isn't political. I think they feel it is far above politics. It's something that they feel they're called to do. I don't think they would ever get involved in party politics. Her Majesty the Queen has always been very assiduous not to get involved in party politics, and she's right not to. I didn't know Paul was a Republican. But there you go. I'm not. I'm a very strong monarchist. I always will be. And I think they do a marvellous job for the whole of the United Kingdom and will continue to do so.
Well, Arlene, you're right. Of course, the Duke of Edinburgh was a great environmentalist, a great one for habitat restoration and all of those things. And you're right. He has passed that on. I haven't got a problem with any of that. My problem is that standing on a platform and backing a net zero agenda is actually of itself intensely political, because guess who's paying the bill? It's ordinary people out there. Yeah. So I think there is a real issue here. I've no doubt. Again, like all these issues, they'll come back and we'll debate them again. My thanks to Arlene. My thanks very much indeed to Paul. That's it today from The Political Correction.
Hi, I'm Patrick Christie's.
And I'm Mercy Moroki.
And we're hosting a show right here on GB News, 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday. Call to the point.
We're going to be talking about all the big issues that matter to you at home in Britain.
Absolutely, whether it's holding politicians to account, discussing what's taking place in the channel, banging on about law and order, we're not afraid to do the absolute lot of it.
Yes, and if you're thinking it, you can guarantee that we'll be saying it.
Make sure you're here 9:30am till 12pm, every single weekday, right here on GB News, for To the Point.
My name is Andrew Doyle. Join me every Sunday evening at 7pm for Free Speech Nation. This is a show where we address current affairs and news stories of the week with the help of two wonderful comedian panellists. I brought in comics because I want to give it a lighter edge, and also they work for less. See you there.